Okay, so today we are going to finish the book I Survived the Destruction of Pompeii. Yesterday we left off where Marcus and Tata were headed back to the city of Pompeii to try to warn the people. And although they had good intentions, the guards wouldn't take them seriously because they are slaves. Just as they were about to be taken into the gladiator stadium, the ground started to shake again. And so here we pick up chapter 13. The ground shook as Marcus had never felt before, as though hundreds of monsters were waking up in their underground caves, pounding the earth in its fits of fury. Panicking, the guards let go of Marcus and Tata. Marcus ran to his father and clung to him, struggling to stay upright as the earth rose and fell like waves on a wild river. The top of the mountain had blown off, and from the jagged opening gushed an enormous, billowing brown cloud. The cloud seemed to stretch into the heavens. Flames shot through the smoke as jagged bolts of lightning ripped at the sky. People streamed out of the shops. Beggars rose to their feet. Slaves dropped their bundles of wood and water jugs. For a moment, nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to be breathing. All eyes were on the mountain. But then came the shouts. "It's the end of the world. Why are the gods punishing us?" "Everyone must leave Pompeii," Tata shouted. He started pulling Marcus through the crowd. But Festus called to his guards. "No, stop those slaves," Festus bellowed. The guards lunged for Marcus and Tata, but Tata held up his hand. "You must listen," he boomed. Somehow his voice rose up over the roar of Vesuvius. And to Marcus's shock, the guards did not move. They were just as scared as everyone else. You can see the scene there. The great mountain looming over the city. "If you want to live, you must leave now," Tata warned. He spoke not only to the guards, but to the gathering crowd. "Get out of the city and go as far away from the mountain as you can." Just then, a man stepped out of Festus's chariot. His fine toga swished around his powerful body. In his hand flashed the seal of a senator, one of the most powerful men in Pompeii. But it was not Festus that this man had come to talk to. It was Tata. "What you say about the mountain?" he demanded. "How do you know this?" Festus stepped up. "He is just—" The man silenced Festus with a wave of his hand. "Speak," he ordered Tata. Tata did not shrink back from the powerful man. He met his challenging gaze. "Sir, for years my master was the scientist Linus Celius. My son and I were on the mountain last night. We saw many signs that this disaster was coming. Soon it will be too late to escape with our lives." The man looked up on the mountain, at the boiling ash cloud that now filled the sky. The mountain's power seemed to be growing. It was now only a matter of time before this blanket of doom fell over the city. "How much time do we have?" "A few hours at most," Tata said. "The worst will come after the mountain runs out of power. I believe all of the gases and ash in the sky will come back down and explode. A great wave of fire will sweep down over Pompeii." "Dear gods," the man whispered. A mask seemed to drop from his face, burying his fear. "Festus," he said, "we must warn magistrates at once. We must order people to leave the city." And before Festus could reply, the man had rushed off. With surprising speed, he sprinted across the forum. He rushed past the guards and disappeared into the government building. "This is nonsense," Festus bellowed. But his words were cut off by a loud whoosh from the sky just above them. Marcus looked up just in time to see a giant flaming fireball closing in on them. "Look out!" someone screamed. Tata grabbed Marcus, and they dove for cover behind an enormous statue. And then, kaboom! The flaming boulder hit the street with a deafening explosion. Small shards of rock showered over Marcus and Tata. But the explosion had spared them. They struggled to their feet and made their way back to the street where a crowd had formed. He heard gasps and wails of shock. As Tata and Marcus approached, one of Festus's guards turned around. "The master is dead," he announced. Marcus peered through the crowd. The boulder had left a shallow crater in the street, and in the center, lying in a broken heap, was Festus. Marcus looked away. He expected to feel happy. Festus was dead. But it turned out there was no pleasure in seeing anyone's broken body, not even the body of someone as hateful as Festus. Marcus looked up at the roiling clouds spewing from Vesuvius. and all he could feel was terror. Chapter 14. It seemed the magistrates had listened to Festus's visitor from Rome. Within minutes, guards were rushing out of the forum, shouting out warnings. "Leave the city. Go directly to the gates," they commanded. Tata looked at Marcus with relief. They had done their duty, and now at last they could leave Pompeii. But, as they soon discovered, there would be no easy escape. Marcus and Tata joined the sea of people streaming down the main street toward the city gates. They were rich men and slaves, parents with babies in their arms, and children clutching their robes. Some dragged carts piled high with clothes and dishes and baskets. Others lugged sacks. As they passed the gladiator barracks, Marcus glanced inside the open gates. There was a man's body lying motionless in the grass, a pillar smashed across his back. With a jolt, Marcus realized it was the lanista. Tata saw him too, but Tata quickly looked away as he tightened his grip around Marcus's hand. Cyclops must be somewhere in this crowd, Marcus realized. But Marcus was no longer afraid of him. Everyone in Pompeii was fighting the same enemy now, the most heartless killer of all, Vesuvius. Marcus and Tata inched along with the crowd. The sounds from the volcano were getting louder, but most frightening was the darkening sky. An enormous dark cloud had swept down from the mountain. It stretched over the city, turning the day to night. The cloud was black and boiling, and it rumbled with thunder. And then the cloud tore open. Bits of rock fell from the sky. They were very small and light, almost like bits of ice. Tata caught some in his hand. "Hardened ash," Tata said. Ping, ping, ping. They hit rooftops. Plop, plop, plop. They splashed into fountains. They bounced off Marcus's head and shoulders and skittered across the street. But within minutes, the sprinkling of rocks had turned into a downpour. The rocks poured down, hitting the stone streets and rooftops with an ear-splitting clatter. Bam, bam, bam. The crowd erupted in panic, pushing and elbowing, shouting. Someone shoved Marcus, and he almost stumbled. An old woman fell. But the crowd stampeded over her. The rocks seemed to be getting bigger, pounding harder and harder. Dust rose up, making it hard to see. Marcus clutched Tata's hand. He felt as though they were caught in a stampede of terrified animals. "Hold on tight," Tata shouted into Marcus's ear. "I want us out of this crowd." They pushed and squeezed their way through, dodging sharp elbows and scratching fingers, and finally they burst their way out of the crush of screaming people. They hurried into a narrow alley. "Too dangerous," Tata said breathlessly. "Many people are going to get trampled." He pulled Marcus into a doorway. They pressed themselves against the wooden door, trying to escape the hail of rocks. But the downpour was even stronger now. Tata pointed to a small temple just ahead. "We can wait there until it stops." They pulled their tunics over their heads and waded through the river of stones. They were just steps from the building when whoosh! Marcus's heart stopped as he looked up. It was a huge fireball, bigger than the one that killed Festus. Kaboom! The explosion knocked Marcus back. The last thing he saw before he fell was a huge chunk of rock smacking Tata in the head. Marcus hit the ground hard, but within seconds he was back on his feet. He charged over to where Tata lay, crumpled on a bed of stones. Marcus dropped to his knees, grabbing Tata's hand. "Tata," he cried. But Tata just lay there, completely still. Chapter 15. Tata was breathing. Marcus could see that. But then why didn't he open his eyes? Why didn't Tata answer when Marcus called his name? The rock seemed to have knocked him into a deep and terrible sleep, and Marcus could not wake him up. The storm of rocks continued. Flaming boulders whooshed through the sky, their explosions booming all around. Somehow Marcus managed to drag Tata through the rocks. With a strength he never knew he had, he hoisted Tata up the 5 stairs that led through the temple's open doorway. He laid Tata on the cold stone floor and collapsed next to him. Hours passed before Tata's eyes finally fluttered open, and even longer before the fog cleared from his eyes and he could sit up. With each passing minute, it seemed, the mountain's fury grew stronger. The booming and whooshing and thundering and pounding had melded together into a bone-rattling roar. The walls of the temple shook and groaned. They were running out of time. Marcus knew, and then suddenly Tata turned to him. He took Marcus's hand. My dear son, it is time for you to go, he said. I know, Marcus said. As soon as you're strong enough, we can. No, Tata interrupted. I'll never make it to the gates, but if you go now, I'll still have a chance. You'll still have a chance. It took a moment for Marcus to understand what Tata was saying, that Marcus should escape by himself. No, Marcus said, locking eyes with Tata. Please, Marcus, I have thought about this. I have considered every idea. There is no other possibility. Marcus knew that this was right, but it didn't matter. I'm sorry, Marcus said, but I'm staying here with you. He looked away so Tata wouldn't see his tears. And that's when he finally took a good look at the statue that stood right in front of them. The god with wings on his hat and on his sandals. Marcus's whole body tingled. The god was Mercury. A strange but familiar voice whispered in his mind, "When hope is lost, follow the hand of Mercury." The words were so clear as though the old beggar woman was still right next to him. Marcus jumped up and went to the statue. He touched the marble, half expecting the statue to turn to flesh and blood, for Mercury to stoop him and Tata into his arms and fly them to the heavens. What is it? Tata said. He turned to Tata. That old beggar woman, Tata, Marcus explained. There was something else that she said to me. He spoke her words slowly to Tata. Marcus waited for Tata to tell him it was crazy to believe in the ranting words of a stranger. But Tata didn't shake his head. He stared at the statue intently, studying it, and Marcus understood that at that moment it didn't matter whether the beggar woman's words were science or magic or madness. Marcus felt the truth of her words in his heart, and so, it seemed, did Tata. Tata rose to his feet, shaking off his pain and weakness. Marcus, he said, his eyes wide with excitement, look at the statue's right hand. Marcus saw it too. It seemed the statue was pointing to something. But what? The floor was bare. Unless... Marcus dropped to his knees. He felt around the tile floor until he found a gap between two large tiles. His heart pounded as he dug his fingers into the gap. There was a groove in the side of one of the tiles. He lifted it up, and he could barely believe what he saw underneath. There was a trapdoor. And here you can see them discovering that trapdoor. Chapter 16. They lifted open the door and peered into the darkness. All they could see was a rickety wooden ladder leading down into the blackness. The smell of sulfur wafted up, stinging Marcus's eyes. It must lead to some kind of tunnel, Tata said. Where does the tunnel go? Marcus asked. There are tunnels under many Roman cities, Tata said. Most lead out of the city. People used them to escape in an enemy attack. But what if this tunnel didn't lead out of the city? Before he could ask, Tata was climbing down the ladder. He was quickly swallowed by the pitch darkness. Seconds later, his voice echoed up from below. Yes, Marcus, it's a tunnel. Come quickly. Marcus climbed onto the ladder and fumbled his way down, down, down. When he reached the bottom, Tata took his arm. This way, Tata said, turning him. Follow closely behind me. They moved blindly into a narrow passage, crawling on their hands and knees. It was hot as an oven, and the passage was so narrow that their shoulders brushed against the rough sides. The stink of sulfur made Marcus gag. Sweat poured into his eyes. His heart hammered. The tunnel seemed endless, and the further they went, the more terrified Marcus felt. What if the sulfur killed them? What if the tunnel collapsed? Marcus tried to fix his thoughts on his heroes, to gather strength from the stories that had always inspired him. He imagined he was Odysseus, braving the wild seas as he returned home from a decade of fighting. He thought of Hercules, fighting the ferocious beasts. But those stories were of no help to him now. His muscles cramped, his arms and legs shook so violently that it was hard to move. A terrifying idea took hold of him, that this tunnel would never end, that he would be forever trapped in this evil darkness. They'd never make it out. But suddenly his mind flashed to a new story, one that was still being written. And it was the story that gave Marcus the strength to keep moving. It was the story of a slave boy who saved his own father by hurling a live cobra through the air, who escaped from killer clouds, leaping flames, and fiery boulders that came hurtling from the sky. He was not favored by the gods or aided by a powerful king. It was the strange words of a mysterious beggar woman that guided him, a tattered mare who carried him, and his father, so wise and good and brave, who showed him the way through darkness. It was this heroic boy who kept crawling through the tunnel as tears poured from his stinging eyes, who found the strength to help Tata kick open the door at the end of the tunnel. They clawed through piles of rock to get to the surface just outside the city gates of Pompeii. They staggered across a stone-covered field to the olive grove. The old white mare was waiting for them. Marcus put his face close to Peg's, looking into her gentle eye. Tata gently brushed away the rocks and ash that covered her coat. You waited, Marcus said. Snort. Of course she hadn't left them. Marcus and Tata climbed onto Peg's back. Without so much as a tap, the mare took off toward Rome. She ran swiftly, her feet barely touching the ground. They were many miles away when the cloud of ash and gas above Vesuvius collapsed down to earth. The cloud ignited, turning into a flaming whirlwind that blasted down the mountain at speeds faster than any chariot. Within seconds, the city of Pompeii was burned and buried. But the horror of Pompeii was now behind Marcus, and all he felt of the mountain's fury. It was a whisper of heat on his back. He gripped Tata tightly, and together they looked ahead for the bright lights of Rome.